Well, let's bring in two colleagues now from the Parliamentary Press Gallery to discuss some of the key stories of the day. Tonda MacCharles is a parliamentary correspondent with the Toronto Star, and Kristy Kirkup, a parliamentary correspondent with the Globe and Mail. Good to see you both. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about the sound and fury we saw today around, I don't know how many new NAFTAs we can have, but the newest NAFTA, the newest NAFTA, and the sound and fury over aluminum and the possibilities around ratification and stuff. But let's start there, Tonda, with what we heard today. That was really interesting to hear the opposition parties pile on about concerns for the aluminum industry. But we heard earlier in our program the head of the aluminum industry saying, look, yeah, we have concerns, but whatever you do, don't vote down this deal.
Well, that's exactly right. He said the same thing to us. I mean, yes, they've got concerns, but they, perhaps more than the opposition party leaders today, realized that they had a big win in the NAFTA that was signed last November. And yes, this tweaks some extra guarantees for the steel producers, but guess what? Aluminum still got a win. And so if you jeopardize the ratification of the deal, you lose that. So, you know, it's the Prime Minister actually was not as good a defender of his own deal as Chrystia Freeland was. She explained that, you know, this 70% guaranteed North American steel and aluminum content in cars is what we got, and so don't jeopardize it.
And that's unfettered access to the U.S. market.
Unfettered access. So for tariff-free sales, you know, and that benefits Canada, benefits Canadian aluminum producers, and for the Bloc Québécois, the Conservatives, and to a lesser extent the NDP, to raise these as big concerns now, you know, go ahead, draw a red line in that sand. But I think that you're going to have trouble getting the industry on side, because as he said to you, we want it ratified. You're going to have trouble with labor unions, because every labor union, the large organizations, recognize that the deal that raises labor wages in Mexico can only be good for Canadian manufacturers. So I think the opposition parties are kind of playing footsie with a real problem for themselves, actually.
What do you think, Kristy?
Yeah, I think that there's a fundamental disconnect between what the opposition parties are saying and, again, what a number of different groups that Tonda mentioned are coming out kind of saying, yes, we would have maybe liked to have seen a different agreement ultimately, but this needs to get done. And I think that that is really the question now. Today, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, I asked him about, you know, well, what about the economic uncertainty that can be created, you know, if this isn't ratified soon? And he said, well, that's something to consider. But the NDP didn't even come out and say its position on this newest version of NAFTA, because they said they want to be able to go through it and read the fine print. I also think that Canadians are, you know, maybe not following along in the process as closely as we are and are thinking, okay, is this just going to get done? When is this going to get done? It's taken a long time. It's taken an additional year. Now I think that the opposition parties are almost having a hard time getting their message out about these concerns, not to belittle those concerns, but I think that there is a real strong sentiment from a number of players that, you know, it needs to get done.
Yeah, the message to some extent is weakened from the opposition side, as we've touched on, is when you have the head of the industry association saying, I don't need that much help. Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, yeah, we would have liked better, but we still need the deal the way it is.
Right. And, you know, also, I mean, Jagmeet Singh, it was interesting for him to, you know, and fair enough, everybody wants to read the fine print. We do, but we kind of, in these 24 hours since the thing's been done, we have to rely on the briefings that others have gotten, including the various opposition critics. But for Mr. Singh to say, well, how is it that the U.S. Democrats got the deal that the Canadians couldn't? Well, because they have leverage over President Donald Trump. They have the leverage in the U.S. House where they have a majority, and they can force those things. But Canada was in a different negotiating position, and the Canadian government is right. A lot of the provisions, the protections for stronger environmental standards, for higher wages for for Mexican workers rather, those were proposals from the Canadian side. So, you know, it's almost like, you know, recognize a win, take a win when you get it.
Yeah, and the Canadians have said in the last 48 hours that, you know, they've sort of shed some light on the whole process about the Democrats going to bat for the Canadian side, saying, look, they knew eventually this would have to go to Congress, where the Democrats have a certain level of control, where these changes could have been made and have been made. Right? Now, what about the ratification process? The government's trying to push it through as fast as it can. What are you hearing about when we're likely to see ratification?
Well, I think they're being pretty non-committal today, right? They're just saying as soon as possible, respecting due parliamentary procedure. Well, we know that the House is set to rise by the end of the week. But they have some leeway, I think, to bring the opposition parties back. And, previous to this, there was talk of coming back January 27th, but I actually could see them coming back earlier to get this done.
Yeah, I think that time is of the essence here. I think they just want to be able to move ahead as fast as possible. So again, I won't make a prediction, but I think that if they were to extend the sitting, that wouldn't seem unreasonable, that would be something,
And for the longest time, they talked about doing things in lockstep with the U.S. side, right? But now they're not. Now they're saying,
Yep.
the U.S. will have its own timetable influenced by all kinds of stuff that's happening in Washington. But Chrystia Freeland saying today, we think it's okay now to break that thinking and go as soon as we can. We don't need to wait for them, right?
That's right, yeah.
Let's talk about, so we could see them come back early to deal with that. We're also still waiting on an economic update, which I think will provide some interesting information for us. But Bill Morneau, the finance minister, would say,
He didn't give much up today,
no more,
did he?
speaking of non-committal, no more committal, no more information today other than before Christmas.
Right.
What are you hearing on that front? What should we expect?
Well, someone said to me that they could see them doing it in, some sort of manufacturing setting or something like that, like, a budget in the Magna building was once done by the Ontario government.
Right.
I don't know about that. They've always been able to do it here while the House is sitting. I don't see what they'll do with it any different. I think they will brief it here, but maybe they'll take advantage of it.
I guess I'm wondering whether we see any advanced indication, or do we have to wait for a budget to respond to some of these concerns from the premiers? Would an economic update be a time for Bill Morneau, maybe next week after he meets with finance ministers, to be able to say, look, I've heard the provinces on fiscal stabilization.
That you might see.
I've also heard them on healthcare, and watch for the budget, some sign that that's factoring into the economic update.
Yeah.
I think they could do a down payment on the fiscal stabilization thing, because I do think that the premiers gave him some runway on that. And they didn't give Jason Kenney anything when he came to Ottawa this week, did they? But they did acknowledge that, look, we hear your concerns on this. We heard the premiers on that. The finance ministers will meet next week.
He was on a looking for answers tour and commitment tour, and the government side was on the listening tour side.
Listening tour, yeah.
Yeah.
Although, look, they have given Alberta one quid pro quo. They have said, we'll accept your carbon levy on heavy emitters. So it's almost like Jason Kenney got a takeaway before he came. You know what I mean? On Friday there was an agreement. But you're right. I'd forgotten that about the fiscal stabilization agreement that the premiers came to, so that they could maybe perhaps do something like that, or at least do a down payment on it in a fiscal update.
Let's talk a little bit about Andrew Scheer. Lots continues to be said about his leadership, and what are you seeing on Andrew Scheer's performance, and in terms of the context, which is, here's a guy who says he's fighting for his job, and does it look like it?
I guess I've been confused by some of the things he's done over a period of time. I was confused why he wasn't in the House of Commons on Monday. That seemed like an interesting decision, considering the fact that he had, really beaten the drum about Parliament needing to come back right away and to get back to business. And, then they were back to business, and he wasn't there. Apparently he was in Toronto or something. I found that peculiar as well, because of course, yes, there's the theatrics that play out in the House of Commons in question period, but that meant that his voice wasn't being heard on national broadcasts in response to the Liberal middle class tax cut, which of course is a big proposal from the government, and he's been quite outspoken, and the party's been outspoken about the fact that they see that being too little too late. I appreciate that perhaps you're trying to boost the profile of the deputy leader, but I think if you're the leader and you're trying to make the case to party faithful to stay the leader, you kind of want to be the guy that's right in there. He wasn't speaking to reporters after caucus today. That's a big change. I traveled a lot with the Conservatives during the election, and he took all kinds of questions on the road. Everyone would get an opportunity to ask a question. He did lengthy news conferences. I don't know if at this point they're just like, you know what, to heck with you guys, we're not going to, they're buckling down, and they know that it's going to be a really hard road ahead to that convention in Toronto. I think that things are looking really difficult for Andrew Scheer, because he's in a fight for his job.
What do you think, Donna?
Well, Look, I'm told that the Baird report has not yet been submitted. It's not finalized. They're still working on it. So, and he's still talking to people on it. So that may be in part. I mean, Scheer is still having to do a lot of work behind closed doors, listening to a lot of griping. There's still a lot of griping. They're starting to push back. You've seen a couple of things this week where, you know, Scheer loyalists have been pushing back against the critics within. But I don't underestimate the pressure on him internally. 2 weeks ago, didn't think he was going to make it to January, let alone April. Now, I'm not sure. I think that there's so much unease within the party about, if not Scheer, then who, that he may have bought himself some time. And that perhaps explains his positions he's taken since the House came back on the throne speech and today in question period on the new NAFTA. He seems to strike a posture that's more combative than perhaps he would have thought he's in a position to be. To threaten to topple the government at any turn seems a bit of an odd position, but maybe that's the way he holds his own forces united behind him. If he keeps reminding them, we have the ability to bring this government down if we don't mess up. If we keep our dirty laundry inside and we get some opposition people on side with us, we have the power to bring the government down.
Which means we need a leader in place at all times.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
So to me, that explains a little bit of what we've been seeing.
All right. Thank you both. We'll talk again.